The dark morning of January 3, 1944, would forever change the course of Pacific air warfare, as American Marines flying F4U Corsairs prepared to challenge the most feared fighter aircraft in the world and prove that Japanese air superiority was built on a foundation that could crumble under the right tactical approach. For over 2 years, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero had terrorized Allied pilots across the Pacific theater, establishing an iron grip on the skies that seemed unbreakable. This lightweight, nimble fighter aircraft had carved a devastating path from Pearl Harbor through the Solomon Islands, creating a tactical doctrine that American pilots learned through bitter experience never to challenge. The sacred rule drummed into every Allied aviator was simple: never attempt to dogfight a Zero in a turning engagement, as such encounters were tantamount to suicide against an aircraft that could complete a full 360-degree turn in just 12 to 13 seconds. The mathematical disadvantage seemed insurmountable when comparing the two fighters that would soon clash in the skies above the Pacific. The Zero weighed a mere 5,313 pounds, or 2,411 kilograms empty, while the American F4U Corsair tipped the scales at 8,982 pounds, or 4,073 kilograms. This massive weight difference of nearly 4,000 pounds, or 1,800 kilograms, appeared to give the Japanese fighter an overwhelming advantage in sustained turning combat, where lighter aircraft could maintain tighter turning radii and superior maneuverability. The introduction of the F4U Corsair in late 1942 initially seemed to confirm Japanese tactical superiority rather than challenge it. Early encounters between Corsairs and Zeros often ended poorly for American pilots who attempted traditional dogfighting tactics, most notably during the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre of February 14, 1943. During this devastating mission over Bougainville, American losses were so severe that daylight fighter missions were temporarily discontinued, while commanders frantically searched for new tactical approaches that could counter the Zero's seemingly invincible maneuverability advantage. However, beneath the surface of these early defeats, a fundamental transformation in American fighter doctrine was beginning to emerge under the leadership of extraordinary pilots who understood that victory lay not in matching the Zero's strengths, but in exploiting the Corsair's overwhelming advantages in other critical areas of performance. The key would prove to be the massive 2,100 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine that powered the Corsair, enabling it to achieve speeds of 446 miles per hour. 718 kilometers per hour, more than 100 miles per hour, or 161 kilometers per hour, faster than the Zero's maximum speed of 331 miles per hour, or 533 kilometers per hour. So, the tactical revolution began in earnest with Marine Fighter Squadron 214, better known as the Black Sheep Squadron, under the command of Major Gregory Boyington, a hard-drinking former flying tiger, whose unconventional leadership style masked brilliant tactical insights gained from extensive combat experience in China. Boyington had arrived in the Solomons with 6 claimed victories against Japanese aircraft, while flying with the American Volunteer Group, though official records credited him with only 2 confirmed kills during his service with the Flying Tigers. On July 1, 1942, VMF-214 was commissioned at Marine Corps Air Station Owa on the island of Oahu, Hawaii, initially calling themselves the Swashbucklers before being moved to Turtle Bay Airfield on Espiritu Santo in August. There, Boyington took command of 27 pilots who would become the original Black Sheep, a collection of experienced combat veterans with several air-to-air victories and new replacement pilots fresh from the United States, all of whom had been orphaned from disbanded units and given less than 4 weeks to train together before being thrown into combat. The squadron earned its nickname through an unusual combination of circumstances and military bureaucracy. Originally, the pilots wanted to call themselves Boyington's Bastards, reflecting their commander's reputation, their status as orphaned pilots from disbanded squadrons, and their lack of reliable aircraft and mechanical support. However, when this proposed name was presented to Marine Corps Public Information Officer Captain Jack Deschamps, he rejected it because civilian newspapers would never print such language. Deschamps suggested the call sign Black Sheep instead, reasoning that the expression meant essentially the same thing, while being acceptable for public consumption. Although they abandoned the Boyington's Bastards moniker, the squadron retained the black bar of bastardy across their shield as a permanent reminder of their unconventional origins. Their official badge featured the black shield of illegitimacy with a bar sinister, a black sheep superimposed, surrounded by a circle of 12 stars, and crowned with the image of their aircraft, the F4U Corsair. This insignia would become one of the most recognizable squadron symbols in Marine Corps aviation history. From Espiritu Santo, the Black Sheep were moved forward to Guadalcanal and Henderson Airfield in the Solomon Islands, where they initially operated without assigned aircraft or ancillary personnel. The pilots flew to Guadalcanal and later the Russell Islands in borrowed planes that were often in less than satisfactory condition, forcing them to develop innovative maintenance and operational procedures. From Guadalcanal, they would eventually be stationed at Munda and Vela La Vela, always operating close to enemy territory and far from their main supply bases. The evolution of American tactics centered around the principle of energy management, a concept that Boyington and other experienced pilots began to develop through careful analysis of both aircraft capabilities and combat results. Instead of engaging in turning fights at low speeds where the Zero excelled, Corsair pilots learned to use their superior speed and climb rate to maintain altitude advantage, dictating the terms of engagement rather than allowing Japanese pilots to force them into disadvantageous positions. This tactical approach, known as boom and zoom, allowed American pilots to dive on Japanese formations at high speed, deliver devastating attacks with their superior firepower, and climb away before the Zeros could respond effectively. The psychological impact of this tactical shift was profound, transforming American pilots from defensive survivors constantly fleeing combat into aggressive predators actively seeking engagements with enemy aircraft. Central to the Corsair's effectiveness was its overwhelming firepower advantage over the lightly armed Zero. The American fighter mounted 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, each capable of firing 800 rounds per minute for a combined rate of fire of 4,800 rounds per minute. Each gun carried 400 rounds of carefully selected ammunition, providing substantial firepower for extended engagements against multiple targets. The standard ammunition loading consisted of a carefully balanced mixture designed to maximize destructive effect against unarmored Japanese aircraft. A typical belt loading included 1 armor-piercing incendiary round, 1 tracer round, and 1 armor-piercing round in sequence, though some squadrons experimented with different combinations. VMF-214 eventually adopted a modified loading of 2 incendiary rounds, 1 armor-piercing round, 2 more incendiary rounds, and 1 tracer round, finding this combination much more satisfactory in actual combat. The devastating effect of this ammunition against Japanese aircraft cannot be overstated, as the Zero and most other Japanese fighters lacked armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks in order to save weight and extend operational range. When struck by armor-piercing incendiary rounds, these aircraft would frequently burst into spectacular fireballs that could be seen for miles. American pilots reported that well-aimed bursts of 30 to 40 hits could completely destroy a Zero, with the combination of armor-piercing penetration and incendiary ignition, creating explosive detonations that literally tore the lightweight aircraft apart. The psychological transformation of American pilots was equally important to their tactical evolution, as early war encounters with the Zero had created an understandable sense of trepidation among Allied aviators. The Japanese fighter's reputation for invincibility had been built on a foundation of early victories and seemingly impossible maneuvers that allowed experienced Japanese pilots to outfight numerically superior Allied forces. However, as Corsair pilots began to achieve success using boom and zoom tactics, confidence grew dramatically throughout American squadrons. This shift in pilot mentality was exemplified by aces like First Lieutenant Ken Walsh of VMF-124, who became the first Corsair ace and provided detailed analysis of how to fight Zeros effectively. Walsh claimed 20 victories during 3 tours and 7 months in the Solomons during 1943, with 17 of those victories achieved against Zero fighters. His systematic approach to Zero combat emphasized the critical importance of altitude advantage, stating that whoever controlled the high ground dictated the terms of battle and left the enemy with no options for changing the engagement parameters. Walsh's analysis revealed that while the Japanese fighter could outturn the Corsair at low speeds and had a superior slow-speed rate of climb, it was helpless against high-speed diving attacks that exploited the American fighter's superior power-to-weight ratio and structural strength. The Corsair could outperform the Zero in every aspect except slow-speed maneuverability, making speed maintenance the key to survival and victory in combat encounters. During combat, Walsh learned that gun effectiveness was crucial to achieving decisive results against the highly maneuverable Zero. The Corsair's guns were bore-sighted to 1,000 feet or 305 meters, with the electric sight featuring rings covering precise angular measurements, The tremendous firepower advantage meant that Zero pilots had to avoid being hit at all costs, as even brief exposure to the Corsair's concentrated firepower could prove fatal to their unarmored aircraft. There were occasions when Walsh and other experienced Corsair pilots found themselves forced into turning engagements with Zeros at slow speeds, one-on-one encounters that violated all established tactical doctrine. Walsh later recounted that, in these instances, he considered himself fortunate simply to survive the battle, as the Zero's maneuverability advantage became overwhelming at low speeds. Of his 21 total victories, he lost 5 aircraft as a result of combat, was shot down 3 times, and crashed 1 Corsair that plowed into the flight line back at base, destroying another F4U in the process. The tactical revolution reached its crescendo during the Black Sheep Squadron's legendary 84-day combat tour, during which they met Japanese aircraft over their own airfields and territory, accumulating a record of 203 planes destroyed or damaged, while producing 9 fighter aces, with 97 confirmed air-to-air kills. The squadron also sank several Japanese troop transports and supply ships, destroyed numerous ground installations, and achieved countless other victories that contributed to the systematic destruction of Japanese air power in the Solomon Islands. By mid-1943, the tactical balance in the Pacific was shifting dramatically as American production advantages began to tell, with new Corsair squadrons arriving in theater with ever-improving training, equipment, and tactical knowledge gained from the hard-won experience of units like the Black Sheep. Meanwhile, Japanese pilot quality was beginning a steep decline that would accelerate throughout the war, as the carefully selected and extensively trained aviators who had achieved early Japanese air superiority were steadily worn down by combat attrition. The Japanese training system, which had produced superb pilots before the war through extensive flight time and rigorous selection processes, proved unable to replace losses at the rate they were occurring in combat. Pre-war Japanese naval pilots averaged 700 hours of flight training, while Army pilots received 500 hours, producing exceptional aviators but at very low production volumes that could not sustain wartime losses. As combat casualties mounted throughout 1943 and 1944, training standards were progressively reduced to maintain pilot numbers. By January 1945, new Japanese naval pilots were graduating with just 40 hours of flight time, compared to the 525 hours required for American pilots entering combat. This dramatic reduction in training quality had cascading effects on Japanese tactical effectiveness, as complex formation flying and coordinated attacks gave way to increasingly desperate and poorly executed missions. American pilots noted that by 1944, many Japanese aviators seemed inexperienced and prone to tactical errors that more seasoned pilots would never have made. The sophisticated tactical coordination that had characterized early Japanese air operations deteriorated as veteran pilots were killed or wounded, and hastily trained replacements lacked the skills necessary to execute complex maneuvers under combat conditions. Unknowingly, the technological gap was also widening in America's favor as the war progressed, with the Zero remaining fundamentally unchanged throughout the conflict, while American aircraft were continuously improved. Later variants of the Corsair featured more powerful engines, better armor protection, enhanced firepower, and improved flight characteristics that addressed early operational problems. The introduction of radar-equipped night fighters and improved radio communications gave American forces additional advantages that Japanese pilots could not match with their increasingly obsolete equipment. The transformation of Pacific air warfare reached its statistical climax when examining the overall performance of the F4U Corsair during World War II. The aircraft achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio overall, destroying over 2,100 enemy aircraft, while losing only 189 to enemy action. Against the Zero specifically, some sources claim kill ratios as high as 12-to-1, though more conservative analysis suggests the actual ratio may have been closer to 6 or 7-to-1 when accounting for all combat circumstances and verifiable records. These impressive statistics reflected not merely superior technology, although the Corsair's performance advantages were undeniable, but the successful development of tactics that maximize these advantages while minimizing exposure to Zero strengths. American pilots learned to think of air combat not as individual duels, but as systematic applications of energy and firepower designed to achieve decisive results with minimal risk to American aircraft and pilots. The Black Sheep Squadron's combat tour ended on January 8, 1944. Just 5 days after Major Boyington was shot down and captured by the Japanese during a sweep mission to Rabaul. On January 3rd, Boyington had led another aggressive sweep to the heavily defended Japanese stronghold, where the enemy saw the Americans coming and sent up approximately 70 fighters to intercept the Marine formation. During the ensuing engagement, Boyington achieved his final victories before being shot down over enemy territory, ending his remarkable combat career with 28 confirmed kills. The original Black Sheep were disbanded following Boyington's capture, with the pilots being placed in the replacement pool of Marine Aircraft Group 11. However, their exploits and tactical innovations lived on, as their methods were studied, refined, and disseminated to other Marine Corps fighter squadrons throughout the Pacific theater. The tactical doctrine they had developed through trial, error, and bitter experience became standard operating procedure for American fighter pilots engaging Japanese aircraft. VMF-214 was reformed on January 29, 1944, at Marine Corps Air Station Santa Barbara, near Goleta, California, with new pilots and aircraft but carrying forward the lessons learned by the original Black Sheep. The reformed squadron deployed aboard the aircraft carrier USS Franklin on February 4, 1945, to join ongoing operations around Okinawa, though their involvement in World War II would be cut short by tragedy. On March 19, 1945, a Japanese bomber struck USS Franklin, while many Black Sheep aircraft were launching for a strike mission against mainland Japan. The resulting explosion and fire killed 772 people aboard the carrier, including 32 members of the reformed Black Sheep Squadron. This devastating attack effectively ended VMF-214's participation in World War II, though the tactical legacy of the original Black Sheep continued to influence American fighter operations throughout the remaining months of the conflict. The broader strategic implications of American air superiority extended far beyond individual dogfights, as control of the skies allowed American forces to provide close air support for amphibious operations, interdict Japanese supply lines, and conduct strategic bombing campaigns against Japanese positions throughout the Pacific. Each island-hopping campaign depended on achieving local air superiority before ground operations could commence, making the tactical revolution, pioneered by units like the Black Sheep Squadron, crucial to overall American victory in the Pacific theater. The decline of Japanese air power also had profound effects on Japanese strategic planning, as their diminishing ability to contest American air operations forced commanders to rely increasingly on ground-based defenses, and ultimately on desperate measures like organized kamikaze attacks. The systematic destruction of experienced Japanese pilots created a crisis in Japanese aviation that could never be fully resolved, despite frantic efforts to expand training programs and introduce new aircraft designs. By war's end, the transformation was complete, with American air superiority in the Pacific becoming so overwhelming that Japanese aircraft rarely ventured into contested airspace. The few remaining experienced Japanese pilots were carefully husbanded for desperate defensive actions, while hastily trained replacements were often committed to suicide missions rather than conventional combat operations that they lacked the skills to execute effectively. The human cost of this transformation extended to both sides of the conflict, as even successful American pilots faced constant stress and the loss of comrades throughout their combat tours. The psychological burden of aerial combat took its toll on pilots and ground crews alike, while Japanese aviators experienced an even more traumatic transformation, from the glory of early war victories to increasingly hopeless defensive actions against overwhelming American superiority. The technical specifications that enabled this dramatic shift in combat effectiveness reveal the fundamental differences between the two aircraft philosophies. The Corsair's substantial weight of 8,982 pounds, or 4,073 kilograms, reflected heavy armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and robust construction designed to bring pilots home safely from combat missions. The Zero's light weight of 5,313 pounds, or 2,411 kilograms, came at the cost of pilot protection and aircraft durability, prioritizing range and maneuverability over survivability. Engine power differences told a similar story of contrasting design priorities, as the Corsair's massive 2,100 horsepower dwarfed the Zero's 940 horsepower, providing not only superior speed, but also better climb rate, acceleration, and energy retention in combat maneuvers. This power advantage proved crucial in boom and zoom tactics, allowing Corsair pilots to quickly gain altitude after attacks and outrun pursuing Zeros that lacked the engine power to maintain pursuit. The transformation from Japanese air superiority to overwhelming American dominance stands as one of the most complete tactical evolutions in military history, demonstrating how superior training, innovative tactics, and technological advantages can overcome initial disadvantages to establish decisive superiority. The lessons learned in Pacific skies influenced air power doctrine for generations, establishing principles of energy management and systematic exploitation of aircraft advantages that remain relevant to modern fighter tactics and continue to inform contemporary air warfare doctrine worldwide.